Working? Are my slides coming through clearly? Oh, good. I think I can see some slides there. So yes, no, I'm afraid I can't see the screen when I play the slide, so I shall just start and keep going from here. Thank you. It's a great honour to deliver this first endowment lecture in the Dr. Basudev Kar Memorial Oration in the Humanities, and I would like to thank Professor Bedamata for her kind invitation on behalf of the Centre for Translation and Digital Humanities at Ravenshaw University. So my name is Hugh Houghton, and I am the Director of the Institute for Textual Scholarship and Electronic Editing at the University of Birmingham, which is more commonly known by its acronym of ITSI. ITSI is a research institute which was founded in 2005 and is located within the School of Philosophy, Theology and Religion. Now, the reason for this is that the stimulus for the institute came, and indeed still comes, from long-standing work at Birmingham on the text of the Greek New Testament. The challenges of this textual tradition led to our adoption of a digital approach to textual editing. But the tools and approaches which have been developed at ITSI, often in collaboration with textual scholars and programmers throughout the world, have been used by a variety of other projects. Editions on which we've worked include the earliest manuscripts of the Quran, among them the Mingana-Lewis palimpsest at the University of Cambridge, the digital Codex Sinaiticus, physically divided between the British Library, the National Library of Russia, the Leipzig University Library, and St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai itself, but reunited now on a single website. We've also worked on the virtual manuscript room for the University of Birmingham's Cadbury Research Library, which showcased some of its extensive holdings of Middle Eastern manuscripts, as well as material belonging to the Shakespeare Institute. We've worked on a digital edition of the copies of the Magna Carta, held by the Society of Antiquaries in London, and on a 13th century Spanish chronicle known as the Historia de España. You can find out more about these and other online resources which have been created at ITSI on this digital edition's web link at the bottom of the slide. Our current projects focus on the Editio Critica Major, a comprehensive edition of the Greek New Testament, which will lead to a new standard text to support translation and research. We're also a partner in the scholarly edition of the Old Latin Bible, led by the Vetus Latina Institute, founded in 1949. And our work on Greek biblical commentaries, known as Katenai, has included collaboration with Cambridge University Library again on Codex Acanthus, a manuscript about which I will talk more in a moment. We're also working with a team at the University of London, which is creating scholarly editions of the Zoroastrian sacred text, the Yasna, in the original Avestan, as well as early translations. And before we go any further, it's important that I should acknowledge the national and international funding bodies which have supported this research. So it's clear from this slide that most of our work is done in partnership with other research teams. And largely this is due to the potential for collaboration, which is provided by electronic tools and communication technologies. Although also credits must go to the current and the former academic leaders of these projects for their openness to work together and to share approaches, data and software. By avoiding duplicating work, much more progress can be made in producing resources which will be of benefit to the scholarly community, as well as the broader general audience, which is interested in these documents and texts. So in the time which I have today, I'm going to focus on 3 areas of our work. First of all, I'm going to introduce you to the methods and processes which we use to edit the Greek New Testament and have been developed over the last 25 years or so, now leading to the publication of the Editio Major. Then I shall show you how, in the case of Codex Acanthus, digital tools were used to recover a manuscript which had not been read for almost 1,000 years. And finally, I will offer some reflections about the challenges and opportunities of electronic scholarly editing, which may also be of broader application within the humanities. Why do we need digital tools to edit the Greek New Testament? Well, the answer in part is shown here. There are over 5,500 manuscripts, and that's just in Greek. There are at least 8 early translations based on manuscripts which no longer exist. And also we can take into account several thousand biblical quotations in the writings of early Christian authors, which, if they accurately reflect the manuscripts known to them, can be of enormous help in identifying the time and place at which different textual forms were circulating. The current standard edition of the Greek New Testament is basically an updated version developed from those created around the end of the 19th century, and these were based on the technological state of the art in that period. Printing techniques had advanced to make the publication of photographic facsimiles reasonably cost-effective, at least for the most important manuscripts. The railway network enabled scholars to travel across Europe, to visit the great libraries on the continent, and to consult manuscripts in person. And adventurous Bible hunters could go even further and catch a steamship to Egypt to rediscover ancient codices in distant monasteries. And once they were there, if the librarians allowed them, they could apply special chemicals to make faded ink visible to the naked eye, particularly important in the case of reused manuscripts known as palimpsests. So critical editions have always made use of the latest technology in one way or another. Now, one of the major developments of the 20th century was the computer, and this was put to the service of theology at a surprisingly early stage. Roberto Busa, hailed as the father of digital humanities by many, was an Italian Jesuit who teamed up with IBM in the 1940s to produce a concordance to the writings of Thomas Aquinas, using punch cards to encode the data. A few years later, John Ellison created a concordance to the English translation of the Bible known as the Revised Standard Version on magnetic tape. Later on, a Greek text encoded in the same way was used to investigate questions of the authorship of certain New Testament writings. The founder of the Institute for New Testament Textual Research in Münster, Kurt Aland, led a project to compare all surviving Greek New Testament manuscripts over 1,000 variant readings. And the results of this were twofold. It confirmed that, broadly speaking, 90% of the manuscripts agreed 90% of the time, but the most variant texts generally occurred in the oldest manuscripts. And it also led to the selection of around 150 to 200 manuscripts for each book of the New Testament to create the Editio Critica Maior, literally the bigger critical edition, which is the first to be based on all known surviving witnesses in this way. Having selected the manuscripts on the basis of test passages, the chosen witnesses were then transcribed in full, normally on the basis of digital images, many of which are available online. For each manuscript, we take an electronic file with a standard text and alter it every time the manuscript differs from this standard, as well as adding details of the layout. The result is a file which reflects the complete text of that individual document, with its original spelling, punctuation, and any corrections. This online transcription editor provides an intuitive interface in a web browser to work directly on files encoded in an international standard format for publication and reuse. Our transcriptions are made by a team of trained students and researchers at the University of Birmingham, and in the case of the International Greek New Testament project, supplemented by a group of volunteers from across the world. Using this web browser, of course, means people can join in from wherever they're based. We normally follow a double-blind approach. 2 independent electronic transcriptions are made of each witness, and those are run through a comparison program, which highlights any discrepancies. An expert transcription manager resolves these with reference to the original images, and that results in a single official file for each manuscript. On our websites, epistulae.org and johannes.com, we've released all of the files completed so far for public use well in advance of the appearance of the editions, which are still some years down the line. But this means that contributors can see their work online soon after it's completed. Funding bodies can quantify our progress and the amount of research completed so far, and doctoral students and other projects are able to draw on these files for their research, sometimes even bringing to our attention adjustments which may be required. Our German colleagues at the Münster Institute have also made these and their own transcriptions available in the New Testament Virtual Manuscript Room, alongside images of many of the manuscripts. And this site is a wonderful first port of call for anyone interested in working with the documents which transmit the New Testament in Greek. And as I'll show you in shortly, it also includes a digital version of the final edition as well. So let's get back to producing the edition. Once we have all the electronic transcriptions, we need to bring them together to produce the scholarly edition. And we use the CollateX algorithm to compare each of the manuscript files and align the different readings so we can see how they relate to the standard text. But we don't use the algorithm to determine which differences are textually significant and which ones are unimportant for the edition. Instead, we have the Collation Editor, a drag and drop system which has been developed, and that enables us to regularize variants which are not reported in the edition to a standard form. Every time we make a change, we can record the rationale behind it, and that creates a meta text, a commentary on the production of the edition, which will allow collaborators and later users to see what decisions were taken and why. The next stage of creating the critical apparatus is to set the length of the variation units. This is to ensure that each of them makes grammatical sense, and all connected variant readings are treated together, and sometimes this can involve overlapping variation units where different constructions are found. And then finally, the interface allows us to order the variants within each unit, according to the principles adopted for the edition. Project management tools enable the editor to keep track of the process of the edition, and to output the edited collation in a variety of formats. And as with the transcriptions, at this point, we can export the apparatus in a standard format and publish it online in advance of the complete edition in order to examine it further and get feedback and advice from other scholars. So here, as an example, is the recently released apparatus created from 203 Greek manuscripts of the Epistle to the Galatians. This apparatus enables users to see at a glance all of the textual differences for each verse across the whole of the selected corpus of manuscripts. But at the same time, each of these witness sigla is a hyperlink, so we can click on any of these, and in a separate window, we will open with the full transcription of that manuscript. And as we observed before, these transcriptions preserve the original spelling and layout, along with corrections or details of missing portions, when that enables the user to cross-check the apparatus against the files from which it was constructed. The next stage of the editorial process is to work out which of the readings is likely to be the earliest form of text from which the others descend. Now, the problem with such a well-known tradition as the New Testament is contamination. Copyists would have been familiar with multiple forms of text, and perhaps sometimes relied on the text they knew in their head, rather than always making a strict copy of their source document. And in order to take this into account, our colleagues in Münster have developed a tool known as the CBGM, or Coherencebased Genealogical Method. In this suite of programs, which is openly available online, editors determine how the readings in each variation unit are related. So the graph interface at the bottom right allows users to construct a little diagram of how these different readings emerged, beginning with the easiest cases and then leaving the more difficult ones till last. And what the software then does is calculate the relationships between the text of every manuscript, updating them each time a new decision is made on the basis of this individual data from each variation unit to build up a picture of the whole. So it's therefore possible to generate a comparison of any two witnesses within the edition to show how they're related. So in this case, the green boxes with arrows indicate that overall the first manuscript you've chosen has a form of text which is prior to that of the second, whereas in the red boxes the prior readings point in the opposite direction. And this tool also enables these relationships to be quantified as a percentage and as an absolute terms of the number of passages and the number in which they're equal, the number in which witness 1 is prior to witness 2, and so on. In fact, we can click on these buttons on the left to show the precise readings in Greek where these two witnesses differ and what the relationship determined by the editor for these readings is. So this is a remarkably powerful tool which handles a vast amount of data and yet enables us to examine it and work with it in minute detail. The overall development of the textual edition can be expressed by the CBGM software in a textual flow diagram such as this, with the earliest forms of text at the top and the way in which these are related, working through to younger forms of text and the sort of majority tradition down here. And again, through the colouring of the individual variants in each unit, it shows the extent of textual contamination within the tradition, indicating whether each different variant reading had a single point of origin or might have emerged on more than one occasion. So this tool not only assists editors in establishing the earliest form of text, but also sheds light on how that text developed in subsequent generations. And the release of the data and software online means that other scholars can experiment with different hypotheses about how the readings and indeed the manuscripts then may be related, and the impact that can have on the history of the text. As far as the production of the Editio Critica Maior is concerned, we also need to integrate other forms of evidence. I've mentioned already how early translations may preserve important early forms of text, and these can be collected and edited using the same tools as I've already shown you for the Greek. On the right, in contrast, we have a database of biblical quotations in early Christian writers, which can serve to locate the early text forms in time and place, because we know more about where Christian writers were active and when they were working than we do about the origin and provenance of early manuscripts. And indeed, these quotations can sometimes transmit ancient readings as well. So the end result is a printed edition. Now that might seem a bit unexpected, given how this has been born digital as a process from the start. But it only takes the survival of manuscripts themselves to demonstrate the greater permanence of physical objects, and indeed the fixity of physical objects. The paper book serves to fix the edition in time. When it goes to print, it can then be cited in a final form and carried around and opened, even if there's no electricity to turn it on and see what it says. But there is, of course, the free-to-view online version of the apparatus as well, hosted at the NTVMR, as I mentioned earlier. And this version of the apparatus has the text up here, and then down here has hyperlinks to numerous other resources, such as the CBGM interface, a text critical commentary on certain variants, and the databases of versional and patristic evidence, making the most of the online environment. And so in many ways, this Editio Critica Maior of the Greek New Testament embodies our practice of digital editing at ITSE. It's a major ongoing project with many stages, each of which would not be practicable without the electronic tools and methods developed for it. It raises fresh research questions and shines a new light into editorial practice and the associated material which is available for users. And I'll come back to consider some of these issues in the third part of my presentation. But before then, I'm going to introduce you to a recent project which we undertook on just one manuscript. The manuscript is known as Codex Acanthus, from its origin on the Greek island of Zakynthos, where it was found 200 years ago, but it's currently held in Cambridge University Library. On the face of it, this is a 12th century copy of the portions of the Christian Gospels read out during public worship. But if you look closely, particularly at this right-hand page, you might notice other writing in a lighter ink running from top to bottom. Codex Acanthus is a palimpsest, a manuscript which was written on top of an earlier document, which had been washed clean. But enough of the undertext is visible on some pages to the naked eye for us to know that the original writing is the oldest surviving copy of a Greek commentary on the Gospel according to Luke in the form known as a catena, which brings together selections of extracts from early Christian writers, and many of those are only known by being preserved in this type of collection. There had been earlier attempts to read the underlying text. The English scholar Samuel Tregelles tried to decipher the Gospel verses in the middle of the 19th century. In the 1950s, an American textual critic, Harold Greene, spent several months working with the manuscript in Oxford. And this letter tells us more about his working procedures, how he used a magnifying glass and a mirror to try to focus the sunlight onto the page in order to show up the original text. But even that was not sufficient to enable him to read the whole document, and apart from 3 short articles, Greenlee's work remained unpublished. But he did also notice the possibility of digital imaging to bring out more of the text. And several decades later, just 3 years ago, this came true. Thanks to generous project funding from the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council, imaging of Codex Acanthus was carried out in Cambridge by members of 2 specialist teams. The first stage of the process was to take no fewer than 51 high-resolution photographs of each page using different wavelengths of light, from infrared to ultraviolet, as well as X-ray. The next step was to combine images from the wavelengths which best revealed the undertext into a single multispectral image. Some of those images were used to cancel out unnecessary noise or distractions, while others were enhanced by assigning them artificial colours. This complex process was carried out on-site by imaging scientists who worked with textual scholars in order to achieve the best results possible. And there's a short video of this, which has been released by Cambridge University Library. After the initial round of processing, we had 3 complete sets of images. First were those under normal light, as you can see here, which combined the whole visible spectrum, showing you clearly the black colour of the overtext, and then the brown you might just be able to make out of the undertext. And this is actually one of the best preserved pages, but it's still not straightforward to read. The first of the multispectral images were a set of composite pseudo-colour pictures, in which the undertext is coloured red. While these are an improvement on what can be seen with the naked eye, they're still relatively hard to work with, not least because of the ongoing dominance of the black letters of the overtext. The other set were grayscale images known as Sharpies. Now on these, most of the overtext was erased, apart from the little crosses which were written in red ink rather than in black, but the undertext was retained. And although this gives us a sense of the page as a whole, with the gospel text in the middle and the commentary around the outside, it gives us the opposite challenge because it fragments the letters of the undertext where the overtext has been taken away, and it's quite difficult to join them all together. But towards the end of the process, one of the scientists noticed an anomaly on one of the images, and further investigation of this led them to come up with a third set of pictures. These images, known to the project as triples, present the undertext in the most legible way by far. It's coloured here, as you can see, in a dark purple, and then the overtext is not entirely removed, but coloured in a light blue or turquoise, which makes it easier for the brain to join together different parts of the same letter, obscured by the later writing over the top. And with these images, we were able to transcribe every page of the original document, and so make it available for the first time since it had been reused almost 1,000 years earlier. It's brought together as a digital edition on the Cambridge Digital Library, as the University Library owns the manuscript. And we used the same transcription tools and processes that I've already described with reference to the Greek New Testament. In fact, this website comprises transcriptions of 2 manuscripts. Here's the undertext alongside high-resolution versions of the multispectral tipple images. They can be zoomed in to examine details, and then the electronic text on the right matches the original layout of the manuscript with various hyperlinks or tooltips to assist users with navigating and understanding the document. You can even click up and there is a translation of this text into English as well. And then the other manuscript is the Lectionary, which we transcribed, the visible text, with all of these passages used in Christian worship in the 12th century. And I think that this is the first full online transcription of a Greek Gospel lectionary, so it too opens the path to future research about this type of document and its text. We've deposited all of our transcriptions, as well as all the images, in the University of Birmingham's Edata Repository, and this permits long-term storage and availability of the data at an institutional level. We've released the files under the Creative Commons license to permit them to be reused as easily as possible, and that's something to which I'll come back in the final section of my talk. And like the Greek New Testament, we've published the edition as a printed book, with a format complementing that of the digital version. On one side, we have the Greek commentary of the undertext with its original layout, and then opposite is an English translation with a series of notes. And because the work has been funded by a research council, it's also been made as a PDF in open access on the link which you see on the slide. So not only did our project deliver the complete edition as planned, but it also led to the rediscovery of some passages from early Christian writings which were thought to have been lost. In particular, Codex Acanthus contains long extracts in Greek from the writings of Severus of Antioch, a 6th century bishop, who was later condemned as a heretic and his books sentenced to be burned. In addition, this edition has enabled other scholars to identify further manuscripts which preserve the same type of commentary as Codex Acanthus, which until now was thought to be unique, and that's enabled them to go on to propose new understandings of the transmission of this interpretative tradition. And in a sense, that validates our role as digital editors to use tools to produce resources that can then be adopted by scholars working on text, working on interpretation and transmission in order to come to new understandings. Finally, in the Codex Acanthus, I think I ought to introduce you to the members of the project team. It just took 24 months to start work on and complete this edition, but as you can see, it involved a significant number of participants. There were 6 people on the imaging team. In Birmingham, we also had a palimpsest specialist, a theologian with expertise in catenae, and our own technical officer, who was responsible for data management. 6 people worked on the transcriptions, including 2 doctoral students. A local school pupil joined us on a summer placement and worked on the biblical translation for web browser. So, along with the project leaders in Birmingham and also those in Cambridge, who were responsible for an exhibition as well, which closed a couple of weeks ago, some 20 people were involved in some way. I'm delighted to say that we completed the project on time and on budget, but it underlies how collaborative humanities projects are expensive undertakings, requiring a lot of different specialist expertise and a diverse team in order to produce a final output which meets scholarly standards. So with that, I turn to the final part of my lecture. I hope that these descriptions of 2 of our projects have provided some useful insights to benefit you and the way you conceive of the sort of work you're undertaking. And in the time which remains, I'm going to consider some of the challenges and opportunities of a digital approach to research in the humanities. Well, I mean, I had no shortage of ideas when thinking about the ways in which computers shape and change the way we undertake scholarship in the present day. And on the left, there are some of the topics which might be considered opportunities, while on the right are aspects which are more likely to pose challenges. But you may be relieved that I'm not going to go through each of these one by one. Instead, I should group my observations under 4 broad areas: people, scholarship, dissemination, and innovation as themes which underpin digital research. First of all, people. You've already seen the number of participants on the Codex Acanthus project. Our institute is predicated on teamwork. Very few people have the skills both to write software and produce a scholarly edition of an ancient document. Over the years, we've developed a model for working on digital editions, which involves people at all levels of their university career. Students can participate in transcription or data collection. Doctoral researchers undertake self-contained studies, such as examining a particular family of manuscripts. Postdoctoral researchers are needed to handle more complicated sources and to verify the data, while developers create and maintain the software. Finally, editors have to take responsibility for textual decisions, as well as project management. It's sometimes been said that our humanities team has more in common with a scientific laboratory. But there are also challenges associated with this, as our colleagues in the sciences know. Teams have to be funded somehow. Key members must be retained in the face of short-term or project-related contacts. And there needs to be some form of recognition and career progression for everybody, given that we have people at every stage of the academic cycle. Now, one of the key roles in digital projects is that of the research software engineer, a dedicated programmer who supports and develops electronic tools used specifically for a research project. Now, in Birmingham, we have a central team of these software engineers in a university-wide role, but we also have a few developers who are embedded in a discipline-specific context, including in our own institute. Finding the right people to perform this role is crucial. In humanities computing, it can be a particular challenge to translate the academic ideas and requirements into programming standards, which can be developed in terms of software that does what scholars want it to do, no more and indeed no less. But there are so many fuzzy edges when dealing with humanities data that can be a real challenge. However, the sooner that becoming a research software engineer is a recognized career path for those who have that special combination of skills, the better. Collaboration is one of the keys to our research, looking beyond the personnel in our institute to other specialist teams and a broader range of interested parties, such as libraries with collections of manuscripts. Our long-term collaboration with our partner institute in Germany goes back to 1997, when we agreed to adopt the same software and with it the same encoding standards. That meant that we could each take responsibility for different parts of the Greek New Testament, but know that identical tools could be applied to the data we created and everything would be compatible. And in the decades since then, we've taken care to ensure that all changes are mutually agreed and based on standards. That doesn't just happen, and I'm very grateful for the huge amount of goodwill there's been on both sides and the vision and commitment of our colleagues for harmonious working together. Well, this sort of image has become much more familiar in recent months, but it highlights how easy it is to bring people together in the digital sphere. Of course, without this sort of technology, I wouldn't be presenting this lecture today, but we've been holding team meetings online for more than 10 years, including weekly sessions with collaborators in different countries. At Birmingham, in fact, we also offer distance learning postgraduate research degrees with regular supervisions held online. And as I said when it came to transcriptions, the web-based tools and resources we use for our projects mean that participants can be based anywhere in the world. The more we can coordinate activities and approaches, the less duplication there is, and the more chance we have of tackling the primary research questions. Face-to-face meetings continue to be invaluable for building teams and relationships, but in terms of managing a dispersed team and working with collaborators, electronic communication tools play a vital role. If we move on to the challenges and opportunities for scholarship, we should begin with the virtual research environment. Online working opens up a greater realm of resources than ever before. from the comfort of my office, I can examine manuscripts in the Vatican Library, the British Library in London, and Cambridge University, comparing high-resolution images of documents which are hundreds of miles apart and might never have been any closer than that in the time they were used. I can use or create transcriptions with our tools. I could check word forms in an online dictionary or parser. I could consult 6 centuries worth of printed books in an electronic library or with the Internet Archive. I can even contact world experts and share files with the click of a mouse. There's so much that can be drawn on so easily, and while people may talk about creating or curating specific virtual research environments, in reality, the internet itself is surely the environment in which we do much of our research. At the same time, it's always changing and evolving, and that can present challenges in terms of the durability and permanence of resources, that frustration when you click on a link which points to something which is no longer there. For me, one of the huge gains of producing electronic editions is the increase in editorial transparency. As I've already shown you, it's possible for users of our electronic apparatus to click through on the sigler to one of the transcriptions in order to check a reading in the original file, and then, if needed, to compare them with an online image. Every stage of the process is clear and can be verified through links to the data. And in addition, as you've seen as editors, we can record our own observations as we go through working with the data. Any change we make has a justification recorded for it as well. And in these dialog boxes or editorial notes, we're creating a meta-narrative with these comments and explanations about why we made particular decisions. So creating an edition with digital tools means opening ourselves as editors to scrutiny, which can only enhance the accuracy and usefulness of the end project. And there can be this to and fro with users to trial different things, to see what features are useful, what information people need to know, which you wouldn't get if all we were working to do was to produce a single printed book. Another new element of transparency is, in theory at any rate, the reproducibility of the research process. We should be able to rerun the same tools on the same data and get the same results. And then we could set different parameters and see to what extent the results change accordingly. So this online interface for the coherence-based genealogical method was almost 20 years in the making, but now its public release means that users can experiment with different hypotheses and see what their effect might be on individual manuscript relationships and the broader picture as well. So we have this flexibility which was not there with earlier methods and procedures, even though, of course, that requires that the data is made available and interfaces are created which will support such inquiries and show the processes as well as the final product for the edition. Now, the next stage of digital scholarship is the ability to use existing data to ask new research questions or analyze it to produce new insights. For instance, the information from our critical apparatus has been fed into phylogenetic software developed for DNA sequencing. That provides new ways of visualizing the textual tradition, and it could also highlight families of manuscripts which might not previously have been recognized. In addition, as I've said, transcriptions which were made for one project have been redeployed and enhanced for others without having to undertake the work from scratch, as would have been the case with a printed edition. If we have an electronic file to represent the text of that manuscript, we can go back and change it. We can add more information. We can add details and marginalia or paratext. We don't have to go back to a complete blank and start all over again. And that, I hope, will mean that reuse becomes part of humanities scholarship in a way that's not really been possible when dealing with printed texts. But the possibility of reuse leads us into questions of dissemination and data standards. Manuscripts may still have survived across the centuries, but data can often have a much shorter lifespan. For instance, we spent considerable time upgrading our early transcription files after the introduction of Unicode and XML encoding. And what we've come to realize is that while tools and interfaces are ephemeral and often require updates, it's important to adopt data standards which are going to last for the long term. That means avoiding project-specific encoding or conventions and adopting an industry standard, such as markup in XML, which meets the Text Encoding Initiative guidelines, and standard formats for images and so on. It's also vital to provide clear documentation and ensure that procedures are followed consistently in data creation. And research data needs to be stored and curated in such a way as to ensure that it remains accessible well beyond the end of any individual project. I've mentioned our own university repository, which includes a research data store, as well as a library of publications, preprints, and other outputs. And that facility, in fact, serves as a digital showcase for the whole institution and enables our colleagues at the university to see the international impact of and the engagement with the research that goes on here. There are also commercial and community sites where data can be stored and made available, but those might not always be long-term or cost-effective solutions. And in a way, the university asserting the ownership of the data and continuing to make it available for decades to come provides that link which supports our projects beyond the end of their life. And also it means that data sets associated with the research which has gone on here can be easily discovered and interpreted by those who wish to use them in their own research. Now, the availability of data and software too for reuse is also governed by its licensing. Within our projects, we seek to release our material under the most open Creative Commons license, the Attribution license, to ensure that it can be accessed and reused freely, both by our collaborators and others. And in a sense, that's an extension of the paradigm of humanities scholarship. If we publish our opinions, if we publish an article, people can cite that and reuse what has been published and made available, so long as they attribute it to its original source. Now, there are some institutions which can pose problems depending on the extent to which employers or publishers might assert copyright over electronic outputs. But fortunately, there's an increasing movement among funding bodies to insist that the outcomes of publicly funded research are released under an open access agreement. And in the humanities, the costs of assembling a dataset often vastly exceed its commercial possibilities, so ensuring that it can be freely reused and freely redeveloped and enhanced is one way of encouraging and supporting future scholarship. We might almost say that licensing is as important as encoding in ensuring the long-term availability of digital material. Dissemination also involves providing a platform to share research findings, both with other academics and indeed the broader public. Universities have long encouraged the use of social media, and the model of the online or hybrid conference adopted since the pandemic means that it's easier than ever to make these presentations available after the event. And in my own field, the International Greek New Testament Project has set up its own YouTube channel. And there are elsewhere several online fora or discussion boards where research can be communicated, alongside more traditional channels to publish and present research. Finally, innovation presents both opportunities and challenges. Research is about coming to a new understanding, and in that respect, the digital medium presents a huge opportunity. We make much of the fact that our editions are born digital. Every step takes place in a digital environment, relying on the electronic images, text, software, and publication tools which are available to us. But our goal is also to produce something which will last and continue to be of scholarly value decades from now. I do worry that there seems to be a danger that many projects which identify themselves as digital humanities end up offering no more than a proof of concept, because of the resources, the data, and the maintenance required even to address the research questions. And I'm glad to say that the tools and the standards that we've been involved in developing have been adopted by a variety of projects and continue to evolve and provide the basis for other projects to gather data and to make electronic publications. But that's not always the case in digital humanities. Still, it's a salutary tale that concordances which took decades to produce on punch cards and electronic tape can now be generated or regenerated at the touch of a button. And I wonder, will really good optical character recognition programs eventually take over from the hours spent by human manuscript transcribers on our projects? Certainly, we've created a huge body of quality training data, which could be used for developing such a program. But in the humanities, it's sometimes only through that process of gathering the data and familiarizing yourself with the artifacts that we come to understand what the research questions are and to make those insights which take scholarship forward. What effect, I wonder, will automated translation have on work with ancient documents, or indeed engagement between scholars of different countries? At present, as you see here, inbuilt browser translation tools can't yet convincingly handle the complexities of a Greek New Testament manuscript. But I suspect that in a few years, the outcomes will be far more satisfactory. And that will not only have an impact on the documents and the language traditions with which we work, but will also affect the accessibility of our own scholarly publications and bring to light perhaps language communities of scholarly outputs which have not played a part in broader scholarly traditions. So that's an exciting development, which I suspect will also be of importance to your centre. And finally, will the data which we, as the first generation of digital editors, have spent years carefully crafting, be fed into a machine learning program to train computers to do the same job with more consistency? Or will robot readers require a completely different sort of edition and lead the way into realms as yet unimagined? Whatever the answers are, I do know that this is an exciting time to be involved in digital textual scholarship. As more and more high-resolution images and electronic resources come online, we as editors have a unique opportunity to bring these together in order to create new editions and interpretative frameworks so that specialists and non-specialist users can encounter different textual cultures and come to a better and a fuller understanding of the documents and writings which have played such an important role in intellectual developments and in the formation of community identity. And I hope that this new series of endowed lectures and the projects of the Centre for Translation and Digital Humanities will play its part in this scholarly endeavour, and I wish you very well indeed for your activities. Thank you once again for the invitation to speak today and for your attention.
Can I have the earphone? Thank you, Professor Houghton. Houghton, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. I'm so sorry that we could not enable you to listen to the introduction of the oration and the Dr. Basudev Kaur Memorial Foundation before the beginning of the lecture because of connectivity problems. I also introduce the audience to your extensive expertise in textual scholarship and digital humanities, but I'm so glad that we are able to meet online finally during the event. And thank you for that enlightening lecture on the complex processes involved in the study of ancient manuscripts using computational tools. As you might know, that we have both scholars of digital humanities as well as generalist members in the audience. So I think it would do good to summarize the content of your lecture for our audience. Your research breaks new grounds and gives rise to questions for scholars working at the interface of humanities and computing. And this lecture was especially planned for the first batch of the students of computational humanities at the Center for Translation and Digital Humanities. You have also described the highly interdisciplinary nature of the work and the need to bring together an interdisciplinary team, and for making a transition from the traditional solitary forms of research to highly collaborative research, something which I must say is a very uncomfortable transition, particularly for scholars like us who are in the habit of conducting solitary research, but nonetheless, it's of prime importance for scholars in digital humanities. The best thing of your description of the use of phylogenetic software used for DNA sequencing and how it can be used for the genealogical study of the ancient manuscripts was in particular very eye-opening for us. And your step-by-step outlining of the processes involved, I'm sure will help us a great deal as we go forward in our research activities at the center. We have just 2 questions for you, Professor Houghton.
Good.
The first question is, does digitizing a manuscript in any way challenge the authenticity of the text?
Now that's an interesting observation. And I think digitizing a manuscript is like making a print publication, that you need to be aware of the difference between the original and the surrogate. So the original manuscript is always going to be a historic document which has its own power and its own significance. And yet the surrogate is a means of people being able to access it and making it far more widely available. Only a limited number of people can go to consult an original in its situ, in a library, in a museum. Whereas if you have photographic images, if you have digital replacement, it doesn't have the same authenticity as the physical document itself. But nevertheless, it enables more people to engage with the text. And I think that is a key element of textual theory when working with ancient documents, to distinguish between the individual document, which is almost, if you like, an archaeological artifact with its history and its physicality, and between the text which it transmits. So for us working with the Greek New Testament, we have a lot of manuscripts which have been very important for the communities which created them, which used them, and which still keep them as venerated objects these days. But the text to which those documents bear witness is actually the text of the New Testament tradition more broadly. And that's what we as scholars are also interested in exploring. So that, if you like, we have this double approach now, that we're looking at individual artifacts, but the text itself is something that we can now study better than ever with these digital tools.
Thank you. And the second question is there a possibility for multispectral imaging to restore the text from the faded manuscripts, from the balances, as you said?
Well, that's what we showed with Codex Acanthus. I have to say that before we started that project, some preliminary examinations were undertaken, and it looked like it was going to be very positive. But actually, when the specialists started working with the manuscript, the techniques they thought would be the most successful turned out not to work, and it was, in a sense, pure chance that they found the combination of spectral images which gave us those marvelous triple images to work from. So multispectral images can certainly be applied to restore faded text, to restore text which has been damaged by water, even text which has been damaged by fire, because it's looking at the reflectance of different wavelengths, different chemical wavelengths in different bands of light. So there's a huge potential to restore faded documents, but at the same time, we're still trying to make the most of a bad situation that manuscripts have become damaged in the first place. And I'm very grateful that the majority of manuscripts we work with have not suffered damage of that sort.
Thank you, Professor Houghton. I'm sure we'll keep this conversation continuing through our, interactions via email and through our research collaborations, which I'm very hopeful of to strike in 2022. I'm really looking forward to your visit on the campus, as you said that you would also love to visit us on the campus sometime in the future.
That would be great, but it's wonderful that these digital tools enable me to speak to you from thousands of miles away and show you something of what we've done. And I'm very grateful indeed for the opportunity of joining you in real time today. Real time, if not real place.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Houghton. So it's time for us to log off StreamYard so that we can move on to the next speaker for the session. Thank you,
Thank you
Professor
very much.
Houghton.
Goodbye.
Thank you.